start the, great, okay. All right, so I am Tommy Henderson of Henderson's Lineup Super Steer, and this is going to be it's the S2RV and M2 Steering, Ride, and Handling Solutions webinar. So what we're going to cover, first I'll talk a little bit about the history of Henderson's Lineup Super Steer, and then we are going to go over S2RV and M2 upgrades specifically. So we'll start off talking about steering solutions, we'll look at ride solutions, handling, and then finally we will have a Q&A session at the end. And I do want to put a note here to our Kodiak owners. I'm not sure if anyone on this it does own a Kodiak chassis. It is going to be focused on the M2 and S2RV upgrades. Many of the same will apply to the Kodiak chassis. So just in case there's anyone on here who does have one of those, I will try to mention that throughout the presentation as well. But the focus really will be on the S2RV and M2 Super C chassis. And if you have a Kodiak, you want to learn more, please give us a call. We've been working on those for quite a few years. 888-898-3281 will get you to our Super Steer team. They're closed now, but 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific time, Monday through Friday, we answer the phone. So I'm just going to start off talking about the history of Henderson's Lineup, just to give you an idea where we came from. So back in 1961, my grandpa Floyd Henderson started the company. He had been a fighter bomber pilot in World War II, flew A-20s and A-26s, flew Battle of the Bulge, D-Day. Then from there, he moved from Omaha, Nebraska to Fort Bragg, California, and then eventually from Fort Bragg to Grants Pass, Oregon, which is what's shown there. The shop that he bought, the lineup, eventually became Henderson's Lineup. And so Robert Henderson, my dad, is Floyd's son. He took it over in the 1980s. And so today, Robert is he's the owner of the business, and I'm going to be taking over at the beginning of next year. So really proud to take over, build on that heritage where really we started working on motorhomes back in the 1980s, really saw a need there for steering and suspension parts. Those early ones especially did not drive good at all. And from there, we developed our Super Steer line of products and have really grown from there. And on the Super C specifically, we really started getting into this back in Shipshewana, Indiana last year at the Super C rally. And so my dad attended that rally, did quite a few inspections. It was a great learning experience for us, and we really built a lot of good friendships there, good relationships with the group. And from there, we were in Spearfish this summer. So there's me in the background there with my dad. That was the Class C Broads video I pulled from. Yeah, that was a really great time in Spearfish. We did some installations there, inspections, and we did a seminar. And after that seminar, we got some feedback of, hey, it was good presentation, but we want to learn more about some of these products. We want to go into more depth, because we really did have a lot of material within just a 1-hour presentation. So that's really the goal of this webinar, is to get deeper into a lot of those upgrades specifically for the M2 and S2 RV chassis, and then just give you guys an opportunity to ask questions and just try to get you guys information that's helpful for you and helping those coaches to drive better. So with that, I'm going to jump into upgrades. So we'll start with steering. That's a common complaint a lot of you had. So some different issues people may experience on these: steering play, poor returnability, wander. So what are some of the things that you can do to improve upon that? Well, first, Safety Plus steering control is a really good upgrade. We recommend it all the time. We're not directly affiliated with them, but we do work really closely with them. But what is a Safety Plus? Well, it's a self-centering steering stabilizer. So that means it's got 230 pounds of centering force right off center. That's for the blue unit, which is what all of the all of the S2RV and M2 coaches would use. It's the 41-230 is the part number, and 230 stands for the pound force that's right off center. And we tested that for ourselves. I'm a scrawny guy, so I can't get the thing to budge, but my uncle pushed on the thing on a bathroom scale, and it does actually take 230 pounds just to get that thing to budge. So really positive center point. So what does that do for you? Well, it helps maintain straight ahead steering, helps resist crosswinds, wander, and helps maintain that straight ahead steering when you're getting passed by trucks or passing semi trucks. It also improves the return to center. So that poor returnability is an issue sometimes with motorhomes, where you round a corner, maybe you're used to driving your car with rack and pinion and letting up on the wheel, letting it center itself up. A lot of times motorhomes don't do that quite as well. In my experience, the S2RV and M2 are not too bad for that, not compared to some other chassis, but the 41230, the Safety Plus, really does help further improve upon that. And then from a safety standpoint, that spring centering force, it does help keep your wheels pointed straight ahead in the event of a front tire blowout, which is really why the Safety Plus was originally developed. It was actually a trucker back in the 80s who had lost some friends to front tire blowouts, and he wanted to come up with something that would help maintain control in that event. So it's that safety aspect plus the drivability is really where it gets its name, that it does have a benefit just in everyday driving as well. But it's not just the spring centering force, it also is a hydraulic damper. So just like a shimmy damper or a steering stabilizer, it does absorb that shock in the steering as well, which again, in the event of a front tire blowout, coupled with that spring centering force, really does have a nice safety benefit in addition to helping the coach drive better. So for an S2RV, application wise, pretty straightforward. It's the 41-230 and the F105K4 bracket kit. You do have to buy the bracket kit separately from the cylinder, just because there are a ton of different applications for the cylinder itself. Now, if you have an M2, it gets a little bit more complicated. So we do need you to measure the diameter of your front axle U-bolts as well as the diameter of your tie rod, because we do see some variation in both of those. Most of the M2s that we're seeing, at least at the Spearfish Rally, all of the Senecas and Accolades that we inspected did have a 3/4 inch U-bolt. So you're probably safe there, but best to confirm. But we do still see variation in that tie rod tube diameter. So the way the numbering scheme on the Safety Plus bracket kits work is that last number, the K2, K2.5, or K3, denotes the diameter of the tie rod, whereas the bracket itself stays the same if it's the S-147. So yeah, just relates to the tie rod tube size. Now, if your U-bolts happen to be something other than 3/4 of an inch, then we may need additional measurements just to confirm the correct bracket kit. So that may be like distance from the back of the axle to the tie rod, ground to tie rod tube, and of course knowing just what is the actual diameter of those U-bolts as well as the tie rod. But that is something that we can work with you on if you do have more of an oddball type situation. Now, I do have an exciting new announcement that we, for the S2RV chassis specifically, this is a brand new application of our trim unit. So what a trim unit does is it essentially, instead of this bracket here that mounts the Safety Plus cylinder to the axle, you've got this sliding attachment point basically. So it lets the center point of that Safety Plus be adjusted on the fly. And so why is that helpful? Well, so Safety Plus is great in just your everyday average conditions. The way you'd install a Safety Plus is you've got to test drive it after installation and make sure that where it clamps onto that tie rod holds your wheels in the best straight ahead steering point for average conditions, average road crown. And generally that's fine. That's good. It's better than having no Safety Plus at all. In some conditions, if you are driving, say, in the Midwest, where you've got just a constant crosswind, South Dakota, Minnesota, you may have to constantly steer into that wind. And so, in a case like that, you are now kind of fighting against your safety plus because, again, it's trying to hold your steering straight. It's doing its job, 230 pounds of centering force right on center. Um, but in those conditions, it can be really nice if you can actually use the safety plus to help you. And that's where this kit is really cool, where it lets you actually use the safety plus to hold your steering into the wind. Not just wind, also, it can compensate for varying road crown. Now, road crown can really make a big difference too, in terms of, does your coach want to keep tracking straight? Does it want to go off to the right? Follow that, that slope of the road down. Those conditions are not always the same. So again, I'm not saying this to dig on the safety plus itself. It's a great upgrade. But there are cases where sometimes the center point of that unit would have to change to, always maintain that straight ahead tracking. So we're still developing this. Again, we just tested it just within this last month. I think one of the attendees on this call actually is the one who we did that test fit install on. Um, and so we are expecting to have it early next month, just working through the kit and the installation instructions. So stay tuned on that. Let us know if that's something that is of interest to you. And for an M2, we're a little further out on that. So really, if you are in the greater, Oregon area, Southern Oregon, and you have an M2 Super C, we would love to get your coach in and actually do some test fit work to see about coming up with a bracket kit for that application. But so you can see there the way it works. It's an air chamber that just like a brake air chamber that clamps onto this sliding bolt. So Super C is a great application because you've got air brakes, you've got that compressor that you can tie into, got plenty of space behind this front axle. So really, really excited to have this. We've had it for quite a while now for the Freightliner XC Class A, as well as some of the Monaco Roadmaster Class A chassis, but this is a brand new one. So just to give you an idea of how it would work in practice, you've got this switch that we mounted just kind of above the driver's head. So it's a momentary switch. You just pull down on that. That releases the center point, steer into the wind, and then release on that switch. Now the safety plus is holding your steering in that position. All right, so from there, we'll talk about front track bars. So this is something that we have it controls that lateral movement in the front axle. So you've got leaf spring suspension on both the S2RV and M2 coaches, as well as the Kodiak chassis as well. Those leaf springs do an okay job of locating that front axle, but they don't do a perfect job just because of just softness in the spring bushings, flex in the springs themselves. So that can lead to some wander, delayed steering response. So we do have these for the S2RV as well as the Kodiak. For the M2, it's a little bit more sparse in terms of the years that it fits. I believe that we can make these work on the majority of the 2007 to 2018 Senecas and Accolades built on the M2 chassis, but we do need to see some pictures of the frame and axle area just to confirm fitment there, as there are sometimes some complications with the way that installs. But you can get an idea there. You've just got the one bracket that drops down from the frame on the driver's side, and then goes down to the axle on the passenger side. So where we sometimes see some issues is if it's an older M2 with hydraulic brakes, you've got a lot of brake lines in that area, and that can get in the way of the frame bracket. But here's just a graphic kind of demonstrating what we're talking about. So again, those leaf springs, as well as the spring bushings, the shackles, those all allow a little bit of movement in that front axle, and that just leads to that vagueness in the steering and that delayed steering response. And then again, not sure if we have any Kodiaks on the call, but Kodiaks have a leaf spring rear axle, and that's where we actually have our own super steer rear track bar that does the same thing just for the back axle to control that tail wag sensation. Those of you with M2s and S2RVs, you've got air rear suspension, so you've got a rear track bar from the factory. Another note too is it's always important to check your weight distribution for steering. So ideally, we want to see like about a 1-to-2 ratio of front to rear axle weight. On these Super Cs, we're not usually seeing that good of a ratio, and generally they still drive okay, but this is kind of the ideal that we shoot for. And what can happen if you're too light on the front axle is just picture like driving a pickup truck with a bed full of firewood or gravel or something where the steering just gets real twitchy in the front. So similar concept with a motorhome, that the lighter you are on the front axle, the more sensitive to say crosswinds, passing trucks, and the more of a tendency to wander you may have. So always a good idea to get your coach weighed, not just for this purpose, but also to know where to set your tire pressure, which I'll get to a little bit later. And then one final note on steering is that actually reducing body roll or sway can effectively improve your steering response too. If you think of like, if you've got a lot of body roll, you change directions, the thing kind of does this first, and then everything has to kind of catch up. Just think of like piloting a boat or something. It's the same thing where your wheels may be turning and your axle may be moving pretty quickly, but everything up above is taking some time to catch up to that. So if you can reduce the body roll and sway, then that can also improve your feeling of steering response as well. All right, so that wraps up steering. Now we are going to, and we're going to talk more about sway in the handling segment. So now we're going to talk about ride quality solutions. So first thing, so I mentioned before about getting the coach weighed. So also from a ride quality standpoint, very important to do that. That tells you what pressure you actually need to run your tires at. So here's an example of a tire pressure chart. This is Goodyear, but Michelin publishes something similar. Not every tire manufacturer makes this super easy to find, but what you can do is look at just a comparable tire. So with a comparable load rating, in this case, this is load range H, this is load range G, and similar weight rating at the same tire pressure to try to, match it up and get an idea of where you actually need to run. Loading varies, tire selection varies, so it's really best to go based on what the manufacturer of the tire specifies for the actual weight that you're carrying. And also, even if you can safely drop your tire pressure by even 5 psi, then you can actually feel a difference in the ride quality from doing that. But again, it's important to make sure that you're running enough to safely carry the weight that you're running. And we generally like to build in at least like a 5 psi buffer. So let's say let's see here, these are for a single tire. So let's say I'm 9,000 pounds on my front axle. Well, I probably want to go, probably 90 would barely cut it, or if you double that number, that's for a single tire, so you'd be 9,100 theoretically that could carry. We'd probably bump it up to 95 just to give you a little bit of buffer. So just a good rule of thumb to give yourself some margin there. So another one is weight distribution. And so too little weight on the front axle, especially compared to your gross axle weight rating, can lead to a harsh ride. So I just wanted to note this. So these are taken from the Freightliner custom chassis website, is that some S2RV coaches have a 12,000 pound rated front axle. Others have a 10,000 pound front axle, but we've seen where you got a 12K front axle and you may only weigh about 9 or 10,000 pounds. So if you have that much of a margin between the gross axle weight rating and the actual weight you're carrying, then you're probably somewhat oversprung for the weight, and you're probably going to ride a little rough as a result. So just something to be aware of there. Again, good reason to get the coach weighed and a good reason to look at your VIN tag to know what your axles are actually rated at carrying. And then another note too, the fuel tank location can have a big impact on how that weight is distributed. So with the M2, generally I've seen the fuel tanks under the steps. Well, with the S2RV, you've got the fuel tank way in the back behind the rear axle. So um, generally then you're going to have a little more weight up front with that M2 setup, and you're probably going to have a little better ride because the more weight you can have on that axle, usually the better it's going to ride. So from there, shocks are a very common thing that we talk about for improving the ride quality. So we've worked closely with Koni for over 20 years. We really like their products, so that's what we're going to advocate for. We believe that they provide a really excellent balance of ride quality and control. And for the S2RV coach, generally this is what we're recommending. In the front, the 99B 3209 in the front, and then in the back, either the 8805 1009, or in some cases we'll just go with the same Evo in the back as well. And those do a really nice job compared to the factory Sachs shocks of just giving better control and better ride quality. On the M2, it gets a little more complicated because we do seem to see a little bit more variation in terms of ride height. So in this case, we do ask for a measurement of the length of your shocks at ride height, just to make sure that we're speccing the best shock for where the coach is sitting. A lot of times we are still running the 3209s, the 1009s. In some cases, we're running the 1040s in the front if it sits a little bit longer. And in some cases, we actually have ran that the 9905 1031 as a front shock as well. That's actually the rear shock from a Freightliner XC, but they have worked pretty nicely up front on the M2 as well. But just to note that Koni does not have an application yet that is purpose built for the M2 and S2RV. So what we're doing is we're just taking existing shocks kind of through trial and error. These are the ones that we have found work work the best from a fitment standpoint and a performance standpoint on the S2RV and M2 chassis. Now, I do want to note that some spacers are required because the Freightliner factory shocks, they're a little bit wide on the front, and on the back, they've got kind of a funky offset on your top mount and your bottom mount. We've got instructions that show how those go on there, but those are sold separately from the shocks. On the front, you need 2 per front shock and 4 for each rear shock. We have them for $8 per spacer. We can do kind of package bundles if you call us, that cuts down on that a bit. But that's where we are today in terms of availability. And just a note too, we are currently back ordered on the let's see if I go back here, we can see, yeah, the 3209s, we're just about out of stock on those. The 1009s, we are already out of stock. We should be getting more in by early next year, but I think with the growth of people using these Konis on the S2RV and M2, Koni's supply is kind of playing catch up to that. But we do have a way that if you want to be notified when these shocks get back in stock, you can enter your email address into a field on our website, and then we'll send you a notification. It's not a commitment to buy, but just saying, hey, let me know when it's in stock, and we will send you an email to let you know when that happens. So then I do want to know that, or I do want to tell you that, as I said, we don't have a purpose-built Koni shock yet. We have done some development with Koni. We're working with them on purpose-built M2 and S2RV shocks. I see one of the attendees on this call actually was a big help to us in doing some testing on that. So timing on these is, as of now, TBD. Should be sometime. Yep, it's you. Um, uh, should be I would say around next summer to fall would be a safe time frame. But I can't say yet. It just depends on Koni's schedule. Um, so stay tuned on that. But as of now, I am confident that what we have does work very well compared to the competition out there. Um, but on this particular coach, it was a 2018 S2RV. He has the Fox commercial series in the front, and then had the Gabriel Gas SLX on the back, which were adjusted to extra firm. And so in the front, I would say we got comparable ride and handling versus the Fox commercial series. So as I understand, those Foxes are discontinued. You can't get them anymore. So the Konis, that you're not giving up anything going to a Koni without being able to get those Foxes anymore. And I am working with their engineers to see if we can further improve the ride beyond where we were. Um, but it is a little bit of a challenge on that front axle specifically because you've got those stiff leaf springs up there. There's kind of only so much you can do, but we're looking to get even better on that in the future. On the back, it was immediately apparent that the Konis were way better than those Gabriels, both in terms of ride quality and handling. So anybody who has the Gabriels on there now, yeah, those Gabriels may have been better than the factory shocks, but the Konis will be dramatically better still. All right, so that's it for the ride quality section. So now we'll move on to handling. And there is a lot of overlap, as you'll see. One fix in one area will also help in another one. As I was talking about the shocks in terms of control and stability, they obviously they help the handling as well. So for handling, sway is a big one. Common complaints on these. Porpoising and bounce, I don't see quite as much complaint of. I think that stiff front suspension kind of prevents a lot of that from happening. But really, the sway is kind of the main thing that we're able to improve upon. So one thing that helps these out is the motion control units. So the rear air suspension does allow for some transfer side to side of air within the system. The motion control units, what they do is just restrict that flow. They slow it down. It's sort of like a damper for your air suspension. Unfortunately, we are out of stock on the 3/8 diameter MCUs as well. We are working to get something in stock again on those. Should be early next year. But the way those install, they just go in line with the airbag. So you would cut your line within 6 inches of the bag, real clean cut, and it's just DOT push lock connectors. Now, what we do have in stock currently is this threaded style of motion control unit. So the functionality is the same. You just have to thread it into the bag rather than use the push lock. So a little bit more complicated of an install, but what we have today uses 3/8 NPT fitting. So I would ask if you want something now, then if you can just confirm the thread size going into the airbag. If it's 3/8 NPT, then this will work for you. And actually, that should be 6075T. My mistake there. There's a difference in the valving. The 6065, that's actually valved for a front axle, where the 6075 is the stronger one for the drive axle. But we do currently have those in stock and have a little bit of a supply left yet on those. The Sumo springs, so these do help control the sway a bit. We have them available for the M2 and the S2RV. In some cases, it can cause a firmer ride. So it's generally not going to be one of the first things I would recommend. I mean, if you're just going to do one thing, you don't want to invest a lot in other areas, it can be a good option, as it can kind of help in multiple different areas. Generally, we're going to recommend that you would do shocks and sway bars first in terms of prioritization. And then just a note on in the case of the S2RV, there can be some modification of the driver's side bracket necessary, as you can kind of see. Is my cursor showing, Rich?
I can't really see it. It's so small.
Okay.
You can shake it,
It might be set
yeah,
to,
that big.
that is showing.
That one's showing.
Oh, good. Okay. So you can kind of see that notch cut there where just to improve or increase clearance to the shock, sometimes that has to be enlarged a little bit as the Konis do run a little bit larger diameter compared to the factory shock. So just something to be aware of there. And again, shocks. So as I noted earlier, the testing that we've done has shown that the shock upgrades do greatly reduce sway and improve control. And we found it, especially on that rear axle, you've got a lot of weight back there. That air suspension has some give to it. Putting a good set of shocks back there really can improve the stability. So anti-sway bars. This is a really big area of improvement on the S2RV and M2. So what an anti-sway bar is a essentially a U-shaped spring. So you can see that graphic there showing the sway bar. So if you picture kind of like this, where as the coach leans one way, that bar is getting twisted, leans the other way, it gets twisted the other way. So it just wants to keep that coach straight up and down, transfer weight over to the other side, and kind of resist that lean. And so if you go from having no anti-sway bar to adding one, that makes a big difference. Also, if you increase the diameter of your anti-sway bar, that can make a pretty good difference too. So every 1/8 of an inch diameter you increase on an anti-sway bar, with everything else being equal, gives you about 30% more strength. So in a couple cases, we're talking about going 1/4 of an inch bigger. That's 60% more strength for the anti-sway bar. So first, on the S2RV, we've got the rear anti-sway bar here. So the 1209 146. So just as I was saying, the S2RV does have a factory rear anti-sway bar. It's got an 1 3/4 bar from the factory. So we replaced that with a 2-inch diameter bar, so 60% stronger. You may think that that's a fairly straightforward installation because you're removing and replacing a factory component, but because of the larger diameter, we actually have to put these, Roadmaster try to do these little adapter plates there to get more space. And you do actually have to drill out this casting to a larger diameter. So if you're going to try to do this one at home, just be prepared to do some drilling and spend some time with it, as it can be a little bit tough getting through that bracket, but it does make a nice difference going that 1/4 inch bigger diameter. On the front, the S2RV does not have an anti-sway bar, so we add the 1209-153 1 3/4 front anti-sway bar, which that does make a nice difference too, going from no bar to adding this one on. And it does mount to the front spring hanger. So again, a little bit of a tricky install, as you have to remove those spring eye bolts in the front to attach these brackets. But that does make a big difference in cutting down on sway in the front. And also, just a side note, I talked about steering response. So a front sway bar is sometimes going to give you a little bit more of that kind of steering response improvement, because you're going to get less dive in the corners directly because of that additional rigidity there resisting that lean. So then on the M2 chassis, so the M2 is kind of the opposite of the S2RV, where S2RV has factory rear sway bar, no front sway bar. M2 has front sway bar and no factory rear sway bar. So on the M2, we've got this 1209 144 Roadmaster 1 3/4 diameter sway bar. And so right now, Roadmaster's fit guide only shows it fitting from 2018 to 2022, but based on a bunch of coaches I looked at in Spearfish, I think it'll work back to about 2007, as long as you have air suspension in the back. If you have an earlier coach with leaf springs, it's a totally different animal. We don't have a rear sway bar, to my knowledge, unless Roadmaster has some oddball earlier fit that will work on those. But the one note on that, You can kind of see in the picture there how that tailpipe exits somewhat close to the sway bar. So if your tailpipe is anywhere near this area, that is something to be aware of if you're looking to do that rear sway bar. If it's way far ahead of your rear axle, then no concern there. You should be able to install it, no issue. And from what I've seen, there are some of the earlier M2s that ran hydraulic brakes that still had rear air suspension. This sway bar should fit fine in that case as well. It's actually a little bit easier of an install because you don't have the big cans in the way there. Again, a little bit involved of an installation. You do have to do some drilling to mount the frame brackets that you can't really see up here, but it's actually just behind the bracket where this kind of half leaf trailing arm mounts to the frame. And if you have rear auto chains, it does not fit. So just a note there. And again, just a note, apologies to any Kodiak listeners, if you're on, but there are sway bar upgrades available for the Kodiak chassis as well. So same thing applies there, that we can go bigger on the anti-sway bar and really improve your stability on that as well. So on the M2 front sway bar, this is kind of an interesting one where uh, the M2s, most of them come from the factory with an 1.5-inch diameter front sway bar, and they're often equipped with what we call a stem and hat bushing style drop link for the sway bar. These bushings can often fail, so you can see there how it's all torn up and missing. So once that fails, this bar is able to flop around. It's much less effective than it otherwise would be. And so we've done some investigation, and it's kind of funny. It's actually an option that the coach builder specifies from Freightliner, where some of them actually came from Freightliner with a better style bracket. It's an eyelet and a bolt. Um, so we wanted to see, okay, like what does it cost to get that from Freightliner? Well, about $600 a bracket, and then another almost $100 per drop link. So we figured we can probably do better than that for pricing. So we're working with Roadmaster. We did one test fit on a newer M2, I believe it was a 2022, and basically to achieve the same thing, that gets away from that weak stem and hat bushing style, gets to this eyelet style. And so we had good success on that. We actually had to make a little bit of modifications. I had to cut this, re-weld it a 1/2 inch out to get better clearance to some components. So we really would like to get a test coach either at our shop here in Grants Pass, Oregon, or up in at Roadmaster's plant in Vancouver, Washington. So anyone with an M2 who has that earlier style of front sway bar end links, please let me know, and we can try to get you scheduled to do a test there. But the goal on those is to be compatible with either the factory front sway bar or this upgraded front sway bar kit, which Roadmaster also has. So they've got this 1209-142. This is 1.75 inches, so 1/4 inch bigger than the factory 1.5-inch bar, so 60% stronger. This is directly compatible if you already have that better style frame bracket with the bolt and eyelet. And the goal also is that the Roadmaster upgraded bracket kits will work directly with this kit, and that's actually how we tested those new brackets. We did them along with this bigger front sway bar to make that work, and it turned out really nice. I mean, that coach drove way better going from basically a non-functional 1.5-inch bar to a functional 1 3/4 inch bar. And yeah, that basically wraps it up for the upgrade discussion. Here's just a note showing our website here, so supersteerparts.com, and you can also call us at that 888-898 3281 number. So we're always working on new applications, and always happy to answer questions too. So with that, I would, yeah, I'd like to open it up to Q&A. So I'm gonna check with Rich here to see if we have any in.
So Jim Gill asked if the tire PSI is dropping by 5 to 6 PSI, will that affect rolling resistance and mileage per hour?
Oh, miles per gallon. Maybe.
Miles per gallon.
Yes, it can.
Can they hear me?
It
Hopefully they could hear.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll restate the question. So if you drop by 5 psi, will it increase your rolling resistance as well as your miles per gallon? Yes. Is that going to be a measurable difference? Probably not. My feeling is that most likely your improvement in ride would outweigh your loss in miles per gallon, but you would just have to test it out and see how it works for you and just find that trade-off. Obviously, safety is most important, but from there, you can play with it and see, you know, where am I most happy with my miles per gallon versus my ride quality. I really think that usually you're going to have a net gain if you're able to drop that that tire pressure a little bit in terms of ride quality and not have a whole lot of a hit on miles per gallon.
Ben Fraser was happy that you answered his question about Koni spacers, so thanks for covering that.
Yep, happy to answer a question about Koni spacers. We have those instructions on our e-store. Anybody has any questions in the middle of an install, you can call us, leave a message. You can also email us. There's a contact us form on the on our website as well.
Got another question from Russ. He says, I currently have a 2023 S2RV with MCUs in place, looking to leverage the EQ system's auto level dump signal to activate a newly installed air dump valves to dump their airbags. Will the MCUs have any effect on this dump valve before and after MCUs are put in the airlines?
Okay, so will motion control units have an effect on dump valves? Yes, they will. It will slow down the process a bit. I mean, it should, my guess is it would maybe add another, say, 30 seconds or so to the time. I haven't done a direct side-by-side test. It kind of depends on how the dump valves are routed as well. But yeah, so if that's really important to you, then maybe you don't want to do MCUs, but most people, it's not slow enough that it's a problem. And I guess just speaking of the dump valve system too, that is something that I neglected to mention here, but it is something that is in the works that we have heard feedback that there is interest if we were to come up with a kit for a dump valve. So that's been something we're investigating. I would definitely welcome anyone who is interested in that or anyone who has any feedback to contact myself. I believe now in the they have a way to contact us from the registration.
No.
Okay. We'll make sure
we're gonna send out the recording.
So we'll send out a recording and we'll make sure that that there's a way for you all to contact us after the fact and you can reply to that. But yeah, definitely would like to hear anyone with interest or feedback on a dump valve kit for the rear air suspension.
Russ said something, I think it is in the new S2RV Plus.
Oh, so they're actually coming with a dump valve. Okay. Interesting. Okay, yeah, I've seen a few M2s, I believe, with a factory dump valve setup, but yeah.
Okay. Ben Fraser asked if the new S2RV Konis become available before the Jayco Integra Super Rally in May. Any chance you guys can bring some with
you? That's a good question. So yeah, so if the new Konis become available before the rally in May, can we bring them there? So we may be able to do a giveaway. I think the scope of our ability to do installations at that rally is still yet to be determined. There are some kind of intricacies with doing installation work in a different state that we have to kind of work out. Um, is it worth all of the hurdles from a compliance standpoint to do that? But I don't I cannot promise that they will be ready by the rally. My feeling is that they may not be, but we'll do what we can to kind of push that process along.
Um, he was not too worried about installation, just inquiring if we would be bringing any with us.
Oh, if we bring any with us. Yeah, we tend to not bring too much stuff to the rallies. We brought motion control units in the past for giveaways because they're very small and easy to transport, but we're flying from Grants Pass, Oregon to Tennessee. Now, potentially we could get Koni to bring some down to drive down from Kentucky. It's a possibility, but at this point, I really can't promise anything.
What about if pre-sold?
If pre-sold?
Yeah.
If we had pre-sold some, then we could bring them to the rally, yes. Or we could just have them shipped directly to the RV park location of the rally. So we could work out something there.
Jeff and Terry say, I'm getting ready to install an air dump system. I can time with and without the MCUs and get back to you when those are in stock. So he's willing to do your testing for you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, my guess is it would take somewhere around maybe twice as long max for it to dump. So you're going from maybe I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute or somewhere in there. It is going to take longer, but I think most people you'll just flip the switch and kind of wait for it, and it's yeah, we have that same issue on other applications of the motion control unit. So a lot of the diesel pushers that run air suspension, if they have an air level or they have a leveling system where it drops the air before it puts the levelers down, it does take a little bit longer, but it's not generally objectionable.
Jim said, I have MCUs installed on my 25 Integra Accolade XL with factory dump valves. It dumps slower than without the MCUs.
Right. Yeah. They definitely will slow it down. It's just generally not an excessive difference with and without MCUs.
Cool. Yeah.
We caught up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, unless anybody has any specific questions, and I can unmute them, but I think that's pretty good.
Thinking I will place the dump valves, but okay. Yeah, you're welcome, Ben.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for, we got 24 people on here, so that's great.
Cool. Yeah, well, yeah, thank you all. Oh, another message there.
Very informative.
Cool. I'm glad.
I'm gonna stop the recording. If you can
Okay.
just give an ending.
Oh, here's another one. I have a 2014 M2, presuming stock everything, which or all your items covered tonight would have the single biggest impact on ride. What would be the do this first no matter what, if such a thing could. Okay, well, so one of the things we always say to people who ask about ride quality, which I'm assuming that's what you mean, as in a softer ride, better ride, would be weigh the coach, find out where to run your tire pressure. From there, I would say look at shock absorbers, and just see, yeah, because the shock absorbers will improve your ride quality. So that's really the main thing for softening the ride. So let me know if that answers your question. A lot of times people use ride in more of a general term, so I can only assume you just mean about kind of trying to get less harshness.
Dealer map.
Yep, thoughts on finding an installer in Oklahoma. So we do have a map. So if you go to our e-store, you can scroll down to there'll be a link to say find a certified dealer, and that will show show where we have dealers. In Oklahoma, I don't believe we have a whole lot. In fact, I can check right
You know
now.
somebody, that would be good.
If yeah, we would love to we would love to hear. There are certain states where we're a little more sparse. And I'm just gonna take a look right now here. So click here to see our recommended dealers. So in Oklahoma, we do have so in Oklahoma City, we've got AAA RV Collision. Not a real strong recommendation there. I mean, depending on where in Oklahoma you are, we have better recommendations for more, I would say, more experienced dealers in either the Dallas area. Luxury coach service outside of Dallas is really good. Garber Diesel in Versailles, Missouri. I know that's a little ways away from Oklahoma. But those would be, I mean, Anderson Alignment in Hutchinson, Kansas is another one. But